Hello everyone, Christopher Fraser here, and welcome back to another Blender video. Today we're going to be talking about lighting your 6 spaceship scenes, because I happen to be a bit of a spaceship guy myself. Now, this tutorial today is going to cover everything from creating a whole lighting scene scheme for your scene. We're going to create an interesting world background, and then we're even going to add emissive materials to our ship here to make the windows come alive, to make the engines come alive, and I highly recommend staying tuned for this whole video, even if you think you know everything I'm going to say, because chances are you're going to come away with something that you didn't already know. So we're going to get started just with the regular lighting, and I've got kind of a lot to cover in this video, I guess. So, we'll see if I can keep it kind of light. So, of course, if we're going to light this scene, this is meant to be in space, at least for my purposes. Now, I mean, for any given scene, there are a billion different ways that you could light it, and those range from anywhere from placing lights manually to HDRIs to just using sunlights or a sky texture or whatever. But what I want to do is I want to create a scene that is meant to be in space, and I don't really have any HDRIs for that, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't have one that suits my needs exactly, or that has a nice stars background or whatever. So we're gonna get started just by creating a light to light our scene. Now to do that, we can hit Shift A and go under Light and add a sunlight. You can ignore the physical, all of these physical light options. Those are for an add-on that I have called Photographer, which I highly recommend downloading. But assuming you don't have it, you can just add in the regular one. I'll go ahead and show my overlays, which will be shown by default, just so that we can see our sun. And I'll move it out of the way so that we can see the line to see what direction it's going in. And then I'm just going to move it into a direction that I like. And honestly, that's pretty good. I mean, this stage doesn't really take very long, just creating the sunlight and adding in the direction. But this is really, really dim. This is a really, really dim sunlight. Now, there are a bunch of different ways to source like the brightness for your lights, but I like to do things physically accurately. So we're going to go into our light settings, and believe it or not, at least if you're using Photographer and using this radiance value, I'm not sure what the default Blender values are without Photographer. I'm not sure if it's maybe artistic. I think it's in a radiance. I think looking it up, I found the Blender units are in watts per meter squared. So what I found doing basically math and stuff is that approximately the correct value for the sun is, it's not 1, it's not 5, even though 5 gives us a really good result. It's actually 175. Now you'll say that blows out the scene a whole bunch, and that is true, but it is still the correct intensity for the sun, and it's, it is what it is. And this is generally the scheme that I like to follow, is this. The sun is about this bright. Lights, like an indoor light, is about 60, I think, for if you're using like a point light. I forget exactly what the math I did behind it was, because I did it a while ago, but that's the correct math. But then to bring it back in exposure, I'm just going to use the method that the Photographer add-on uses, which is to go under the exposure parameter here under color management and change it to about -4.5. Now, if you have Photographer enabled, what you can actually do is go to your camera settings, and under the Photographer dropdown, we can use this exposure checkbox. And Photographer, I keep talking about it. Photographer 4 is only like $15, and it's, in my opinion, it is a must. It adds so many helpful features for lights and coloring, and for exposure. So you could just set that to manual, set the shutter speed to something like 50. Change the aperture to about 22, and then if you want to, you can increase the ISO a bit. 400, that's obviously a bit hot. 200 if you really felt like it. 100 I think is a really good value. And what does that bring us to? -4.608. So like without this, just like you could just set your exposure to -4.6, not 4.6, -4.6. And then you'll be good. And you can see that, in my opinion, the lighting here looks really nice. Obviously, the background now looks really dark, and we didn't even need to bring it all the way down to black, but it looks nice and dark, and we've got this harsh lighting, which emulates the sun. And the angle that it's got set up with by default is, just fine. Now, a disclaimer, I should say technically there is no absolute value for the brightness of sun in space, because it depends on what star, and it depends on how far you are from the star. This is the value, 175 is about the value of the sun on Earth. once it's passed through the atmosphere. So it's not quite physically, it's not like going to be accurate to every scene, but you know, it's going to work fine for our purposes in this case. How am I doing on time? Okay, 5 minutes. All right, we're good. In the future, I'm thinking about streaming these things just because editing is a pain. Now, I want to spice up the lighting just a little bit more because this is perhaps some realistic lighting, quote unquote, if you're in the middle of space, approximately a little bit farther away from our star as Earth is and stuff. But I want to add in a little bit of fill lighting just to make it a bit more pleasing. Now, I've already decided this is going to be my camera perspective, and I'll bring back the shader editor a little bit here. I've already decided that this is going to be the perspective of our camera. So I'm going to hit Shift D with the sun selected to duplicate it. And I'm just we can turn on overlays here to see what we're doing. I'm going to grab this little gizmo here and pull it towards our ship. Then I can hit R to adjust the rotation. And what I'm looking for, if I hit R and Z, is I'm looking for it to mostly light this side of the ship up, but I'm still looking for areas that are shadowed so that we get some contrast and we can still see the shape. Now, Photographer has these nice buttons here that let you change the stop. You don't need to use those, so you can just drag these handles here, and maybe we'll do that. In fact, maybe for this tutorial, because Photographer is so integrated with everything, maybe I'll just turn it off, so that things look on my end the same as they will on your end. So we'll just set the strength to maybe 20, and then we'll bring up the saturation and change the hue a bit. And I'm looking for kind of a nice blue color like that. This to me is a really nice color. And then maybe we can bring up the angle a bit to make this light a bit softer. And, oh, my head hurts. I got to get a drink of water. Excuse me. And to me, this lighting all looks pretty well finished. Now, of course, just setting up lights is all well and good, but I want to explain quickly that my thought process behind these lights is that we've got this main sun, which is acting as kind of a key light, and it's giving, you know, a nice bright primary light. But of course, we are on the shadow side of the object, so it's giving us a bit more of a rim. So we're getting like, you know, we can see all of the nice shaded parts. And what that does is gives us a good idea of the shape of our spaceship here. And this ship, by the way, is an Imperial light cruiser. It's modeled by Alexander Ivanov, which you can buy from his art station, and I will have a link to that down in the description below. I'm absolutely in love with this model. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's great if you want to practice these things along with me. So feel free to go and check that out. Now, we might take this main sunlight. Oops. I don't want to go into matcap view. That was a mistake. Okay, we might take this and rotate it a bit more that way. See if we can play with the lighting and get something a bit more interesting. Yeah, okay, I think this is pretty good. We'll leave this how it is. So that's a good general way to set up most of your lighting. Now, the next thing that we're going to move on to, I would move on to the stars next, but to me, that's sort of a last touch, and you're not always going to need the stars inside of your scene here. Sometimes you'll add that in compositing, or maybe you don't even want any stars. What I really want to spend the bulk of this tutorial, talking about is how we can get these windows lit up nicely and the engines, because there are a lot of interesting techniques here that I think have helped to bring a lot of life to some of my renders, and I'd really like to see some other people using them. So we're going to go ahead and talk about some of that. Now, I'm a firm believer that windows shouldn't just be a mess of materials. Now, let me show you how most people might set up windows. So if we bring open our material view here, this is sort of what we were given, I guess, what the default material was. I'm going to go ahead and add in an emission material. And if we just plug that in and maybe bring up the intensity, this is what most people might do for windows. Now, obviously, you may not want this color. Let's go with something a bit more accurate, like an actual color that you might have on the inside of a window. And we can do that by using the black body node, which will let us use the black body color temperature scale, which is what like real lights and stuff use. I mean, it's based off the laws of nature, which is, you know, gives us a good, it gives us good accurate lighting for like interiors and stuff, because that's how like incandescent bulbs look. And then maybe we'll set it to something interesting like 3500. Or maybe what I like to do, I actually like it when they're set cooler, because on a ship like this, like whenever you look at the interior, it's always very cool lighting. So it makes more sense for the exterior lighting to be a bit bluish. So I like to set it to maybe 7500. And this honestly is okay lighting for the windows, and you could stop here, but I don't like it because it lacks a lot. Like this right here, it's decent, but it doesn't line up with the bridge windows, which you could make it match up, but like if we were to do that, you can see, oh, I selected the wrong material. If we select this here, you can see it just looks very flat. Like it doesn't look natural because windows aren't emissive lights, you know? So it's strange. And, you know, this looks a bit more natural because this is kind of how we're used to seeing things, but still, it doesn't make sense for these windows to just be like panels of light. Like if you look at it, it just looks like a softbox, you know, like it's supposed to be a light source, not a viewport. And there's nothing on the inside, you know, you don't get any change in the parallax as you look around, and they're completely flat and give no indication of scale or depth or anything on the inside of the ship. It's a little bit weird and unnatural, and I don't like it. So what I like to do when I'm building out my emissive materials is I'll just take the window here and I'll copy it. And essentially what my setup here is that I've just got a principal BSDF set up with the specular up and with it made to black. And I've got a layer weight node with the Fresnel input plugged into the alpha. So we have some transparency so that we can see inside. And if you come inside, you can see we can see outside of the windows. They are real functioning windows, but we also still have reflectivity. Like you can see, here's a good example where you can see the reflection of this here rim, and it obeys the laws of Fresnel. So as we look at it at more of an angle, the reflection becomes stronger. You know, it's just a relatively physically accurate glass shader. And if you want to control like the intensity of, oops, what happened? If you want to control the brightness or how much tint the windows have, you can mess around with this blend value. If you bring it up higher, this is going to become white, which means more opaqueness, which means darker windows. So you can mess around with that a little bit as you please. And for the moment, this is pretty accurate for a ship that is turned off. If we look inside, we can see that there is detail on the inside and light is being cast on the inside of the ship here. There is no modeled interior. It's just whatever has been given to us. But, you know, it's something. So the next thing that I like to do is add detail to the inside of the ship. And this is really the big tip that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to model an entire interior for the ship. And if we did do that, it would be really, really unpractical because, you know, it'd be a lot of modeling for something you're not really going to see. And it's going to be inefficient. You know, it's going to take up rendering time. It's going to take up rendering power on your GPU. So here's what we're going to do instead. If I just come up really close to, let's find a window on this side. I'll just do that. Here we go. We'll come up like right here, just so that we can kind of reference. What we're actually going to do to create detail on the inside is we're going to select our hull material, of which I actually have two, but that's not going to be a big problem because they're almost identical if we can just copy it over. And what we're going to do is we're going to add light materials to the inside. Now, let's just go ahead and add in an image texture. This is the first step, and we're going to preview it. Now, right now it's pink, obviously. We don't want it to be pink, so you can't see it in the recording, but I have open right now a window where we are going to select, where's it? Technology control panels. So I've got some images here, and I will leave at least one of them down in the description below. I'll probably leave this one. And so this is an interesting panel image that I made from a picture I downloaded from Unsplash for free, and then I just edited it a bit in Photoshop. And then we'll hit Control T. As long as you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which comes with Blender, I highly recommend it. You can hit Control T, and it will give us this little mapping setup here. And we can just like change the scale. Like if we just bring this value up to something much higher, like 15 maybe, it just gives us like all of these buttons and stuff, which helps to add like a lot more interesting detail. Maybe that's a bit much. We'll go like 10. I think 10's better. And then what we can do is if we just plug this into the emission, then you're going to see, and crank this up a bit, maybe to something like 50, then you're going to see that we can see some of this like control panel material on the inside through the windows, which, you know, is great, except for the fact that now the entire ship is lit up like a Christmas tree, and we don't want it to be that way. So all we have to do now is we have to somehow separate the outside of the hull from the inside. And let me show you a really cool trick to do that. So if I just find some windows again, we'll go to these ones, I guess. Up here. You can alt middle click anywhere, by the way, to center your view to that point. So if I just choose, where do we have some windows? Here we go. If I just center in right here, what we want to do is I'll hit Shift A, and we want to search for a geometry node. Now this geometry node has a bunch of different helpful outputs for different reasons, like position and normal and tangent, and it's got all of these crazy different things. But what we're looking for is this crazy value called backface. Now what this is going to do, and we can really see it up here, is it's going to say whatever faces are basically on the inside or the back face of your material. So if I just give you, here's a good example. If I create a plane here, create a plane, give it the, base white material. We've got a front or a top side to this plane, and we've got a bottom side. And this bottom side is the back face. And the back face is controlled by the normals. For anybody who's familiar with more advanced things, like if you know about face orientation, you can see the outside of the face versus the inside of the face normal. The inside is what becomes white. And we can use this now as a mask to mask out our lights. So we choose base white. All we need to do is add in a mix RGB node, plug in our back facing to this bottom value, and change mix from mix to multiply, and we'll bring the factor up to 1. And now if we preview this, you can see that on the outside of the ship everywhere, we're not getting any of that paneling. It looks like we're getting a little bit, no, you see that's through a window though. So you can see we've got like, you can see that we've got all of this fun detail on the inside, but none of it on the outside, which is exactly what we want. You can really see it to a pretty intense degree inside the bridge here, but we'll deal with that in a minute. So now if we just Control Shift left click on our main material, you can see that we've got these nice control panels on the inside there, and through some other windows, like through here. Here's a good example. You can see that we're seeing at least the lighting. You can see that the back faces are lighting up the inside of the room. So even though you don't even necessarily always see the control panels themselves, you can see the effect of the lighting. Now, maybe you don't want that, and that can kind of slow down your scene sometimes. So maybe if you don't actually want that, we'll just add in another multiply node. And this time we want a light path node. So this will give us data based off of the light path. So if we just say diffuse ray, we'll put that in the multiply, but we actually want to invert that. So if we say everywhere that isn't a diffuse ray, and then we can use a math node, set to add, and add in a glossy ray as well. We can say basically, don't render this if it's a diffuse bounce or if it's a glossy reflection. And the benefit of that, of course, is just faster render times and smoother interiors. But maybe you don't want that, like you want the lighting effect, and you can see that it adds in some more depth. You can see before when we remove that, and then, you know, by default with the lighting effect. So maybe we want to keep it that way, you know. You can kind of see the effect inside the cockpit there as well, or the bridge. So, you know, that's something for you to decide on. I think I'm going to keep the lighting effect. So we might, you know, I've changed my mind because actually I want to be able to demonstrate this better with some other techniques that I'm going to show you. So that's the first step. And we can kind of take this and move this. Oops, I hit F. Move this off to the side here, and I'll hit, not Control G. What's the button to add? I always forget what the button is to add in a frame. Let's just, you know what, frame. I know there's got to be a key binding for it. I'm just forgetting it. There we go. So now that we've got a frame here, we can kind of move this around. And maybe we will give this a label. We'll call this control panels, and bring up that label size, and we'll move these out of the way. There we go. So we can see control panels. But obviously this isn't the end of our journey, because the lights are still mostly, or the windows are still mostly very dark. And up in here, we're seeing it just everywhere, and I don't want to see it everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this right here and hit Control-Shift-D to duplicate the image texture and the mapping node. What I want to do is I want to open up a different texture that I have. And this is a texture that you can generate, or you can find, or you could use noise or whatever. But all this texture is it's this kind of texture. It's just black with some like white dots. And I want to bring the scale of this way lower. And what we're going to do is we're just going to multiply this maybe over that first paneling. And then you can see that now we've got panels in some places, but it's not everywhere. So let's just like 0.5. Yeah, see, you can see it's like we got like some panels in some places, but it's not completely covering like the inside, you know, which is obviously more realistic, because like it'd be kind of weird if there were panels like completely covering every surface of the inside of a room. So, you know, arguably way more accurate, and it just looks better. So we'll bring up the intensity of the emission there. Actually, what we're going to do, we're going to keep the intensity of the emission at 1. And here's why. Because what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this multiply node again. I know we have 4 multiply nodes in a row. Bear with me. So normally you would use a multiply node to darken something. But what we can do here is if we actually put in a value above 1, we can actually use this to brighten something. So you can see that instead of changing the emission intensity, we're just changing the intensity of the texture. And that is, it's doing the exact same thing as changing the emission value. So we can just bring that up to make it a bit brighter so that we can see it. And that's all well and good. All right, now let's add in a mix RGB node, because we want to add in something else. We want to add in the effect of lights on the ceiling. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do something kind of similar to the back-facing thing we did before. And we're actually going to need this back-facing node over here. So I'll just copy that, as well as, actually, I'm not going to copy those. So we're going to need our back-facing again. So let's just use this for a basis and think about how we can get ceiling textures, okay? So let's think about what we want to do here. We want to say every face on the inside of the ship here that is facing downwards, we want to be bright. Well, that sounds like that can be achieved by using normals. So if we just come out here and we hit Shift-A, we add a separate XYZ node, we can plug our normal into here, and because Z is up and down, if we look at this, we can see right now only the faces facing upwards are white, and everything else is black. But here's the thing. Because of the way that normals work, and normal maps and the display and the math and everything, technically this is not a value of 0. It's a value of -1. So if we can take a map range node, and if we bring the from minimum down to -1, you're going to see that now that's black, but everything else is white. So here's what we'll do. We'll set this from -1 to 0. And actually, what if we set this from 0 to -1? There we go. So just in this one map range node, we've managed to get just the bottom facing normals of the entire ship at the moment. But remember how all we had to do was multiply it with our back facing for up here, these lights. Well, if we take our back facing output from here, set it to multiply and the factor to 1, then you'll see that now only on the inside of these windows here, or on the inside of the ship, we're getting all of these ceiling lights, but we're not getting that on the outside of the ship. And if we look around at other points, we can see that inside we're getting more of these ceiling lights, which is perfect. So now if we take this multiply node, and remember we can bring up the intensity like so. And if we plug this into the add, okay, set the factor to 1, and then we look at the shader, we can see that now the inside of the ship is being lit up because we have these actual functioning ceiling lights. See, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So even though there isn't really an interior here, there's still something to look at, and it's being illuminated, and it's interesting. It catches our eyes. It's better than it just being black. You peer through, and as you get a different perspective on the ship, you're getting a nice parallax shift. If you look through the windows here, we can get a similar sort of effect. Or maybe it's just being lit up, but at different angles, the gradient is maybe a little bit different. And, you know, it does. It really does make a difference and add some variation. And you can see there some of that nice parallax. There's not really anything inside, but it still looks nice. Now, I don't actually want this to be white, so I'll just duplicate another multiply node here. And remember, I told you earlier about the black body node. We're going to take this and we're going to plug that into this multiply node here. And again, set this to about 7500. So that way we're getting this slightly bluish light. And you can do this at whatever color you want. Like you can do it at 5500, and that'll give kind of a nice warm interior sort of color. Or you can do it at 4500. 4500K will give you a very warm result. But I want it to be 7500 because I want this to be nice and cool. All right, so that is most of the job done. But you're going to notice that there are still some windows that are totally dark. And there are still some windows that are mostly dark. Like through here, we're still not really seeing much. And I still want to get some more visibility out of there. So here's the last technique that I came up with for the windows, because you can see that like we are getting some of that lighting in here, but all of this for whatever reason is a front face. So it's not being counted as a back face, which means that there's no lighting effect there. So, and I can't exactly explain why that is. It depends on the model. If the model was different, maybe we wouldn't have to do something like the trick I'm about to show you. But in this case, you know, it's something that we got to do. So let's go over to our window material. So we need a way to add light only to the inside of rooms without even needing to know what's back facing and what's not, you know, without having that kind of data. But we need a guaranteed and predictable, a reliable way to flood light onto the inside of the room. So here's what I came up with. What we're actually going to do is we're going to go full circle and turn our windows into light sources. Now this isn't physically accurate. So far, these other things have kind of made sense and been logical, but this is definitely a stylistic choice, but it's still going to give that illusion of some depth on the inside and light, which I think it excuses the fact that it's a very like unrealistic sort of thing. So here's what we got to do. We got to give it some emission, right? We got to bring up the emission strength, and suddenly the windows glow. But the problem is that right now we can see the glow from the outside and it prevents us from seeing inside. We don't want that. So what we can do is if we just search and if we go geometry, see the thing is the back faces here on the windows are pretty predictable. We can see that all of them are black on the outside, but if we go back inside here, they're white on the inside, which is exactly what we want. So here's what we're going to do. If we plug this into the emission color, okay, then you can see that it's lighting up the inside without it appearing lit up to us on the outside. And just as an example, there's before and there's after at a value of 500, which is a pretty drastic difference. The only problem is if you look through the windows at the right angle, you can see that the other windows on the other side, we can see that their back faces are lit up, and we don't want to see that through the windows. So let's do a little bit more node magic. We want to use the multiply node again because this is sort of a magic node for us. When it comes to these sorts of techniques, setting things to multiply is like a godsend. So what we want to do, we want to take the light path node again, and let's play around with this. So really what we want to do is we only want this to be visible to diffuse and in glossy rays. Okay, we only want this to show up when the windows are lighting something directly, or when they're in a reflection. So let's try adding the diffuse ray to this and let's see what happens. All right. Well, it looks like we can see through the windows again now, and it looks like we're still getting lit up. That is a pretty good solution, but I still want to see the glossy. And I know it's not going to make a big difference, but we'll just add in a math node and add in the glossy as well. And that's just going to add in, you know, an extra layer of now any reflections, we're also going to see that. So that is pretty much it for this thing, except for actually, again, I want to add in the black body node, and we could come in here and manually pick a color, but I just prefer using color temperature because it's faster and I can rely on it to be more accurate. So now let's zoom out and take a look at this ship. Now we have something really interesting with our windows. We're seeing a lot of variation in the intensity, where some of these windows, let's get a better angle on this here. On this here. Some of these windows are nice and bright from certain angles, but others are a lot more dim, right? And it's, again, a very angle dependent thing. Like here, these windows aren't as bright, but if we look at it from more of a downwards angle, you can see that the windows look super bright, which is a really nice touch. It makes the windows look really, really nice. Yeah, so that's basically how we make the windows look, in my opinion, really, really good. You don't have to do this. You could just use an emission material, but this is what I like to do for my windows because I think it helps to give a lot of nice depth. Now, I think the emission strength for the inside is maybe a bit much. So let's just like bring this down to something a bit lower. We want the lights to be subtle anyway because they really shouldn't be that bright. When the camera is exposed for the sun, arguably you should hardly be able to see any interior lighting at all. So the fact that these are this bright is kind of pushing it from a stylistic perspective or from a realism perspective. But I think that it helps to bring a lot of life. So, you know, again, it's one of those things that helps to make it more convincing, so it's okay to push it in that direction a bit. Gotta stay hydrated. Now we're 90% of the way there. We've worked on the lighting for the scene overall. We haven't gotten the stars yet. We'll do that in just a minute at the end. We've gotten our light textures and stuff on the inside of you know, on the inside of our spaceship, but we're still missing something pretty important, and that's the engine lighting. Now, if you haven't guessed already, I'm going to go ahead and actually clean up unused data blocks. If you haven't guessed already, I'm a big fan of textured lights. So we're going to carry on that principle over here. Now, I've already UV unwrapped these circles to kind of fill up the entire like UV space. And I'll change the name of this material to engines. Now, what we're going to do here is, surprise, surprise, we're going to add in an image texture. We'll give it a second to load. And then we can preview that. We can hit Control T again to get mapping. And then we're going to open up and we're going to get a an engine texture. Now, this is again something that I'll try to remember to link down below, but they're not that difficult to create. You just need some kind of an interesting looking shape. So this is what I've got imported here. And you can see that it's just like kind of an interesting looking radial texture that's based off of some images and obviously has lots of curves and stuff applied to make it look kind of cool. Yeah, we'll do that to make the colors ramp properly. There you go. So this is what it looks like. I'm using Aces for Blender, by the way. I'm not using Filmic Blender, which is why I've got all of these options. You won't have to worry about this unless you're using Filmic Blender. Don't worry about all these options. So this is what our texture looks like. And I think that looks really cool. So we're going to roll with it. Then what we're going to do, all we have to do is, with our principled BSDF, really just make a material that kind of resembles what the engines might look like if they're off. This isn't even super important because chances are you're not really going to see this. But we can come in here and we could extract, like, we could use this as a bump map into that sort of thing. You get something interesting, and maybe we use the actual texture as like a color, and we can use it as like a specular map as well. You know, it's like when the engines are off, it's going to look like this, which is, you know, also a bit more interesting. Maybe, do I want to use this one? This is the inverse of the one we were just using. Which I think might be kind of interesting. I'm kind of liking the way this is looking, I guess. Trial and error, you know, find something that you like, something that you think looks cool. And as long as you're a fan of it, you know, hopefully it will work out. This looks all right, I think. Okay. Now all we got to do is plug this, you guessed it, into the emission color. We can bring the emission strength up. In this case, I think something like 15,000 will probably do. And then we want to give it some colors, so a multiply node. And then here's what I like to do for thruster colors. I find in most cases, it's nice to use some kind of black body color. You know, if you're going to do yellow, make it using black body. Set it to like 20, somewhere between 2000 and 3000. That's 300 and 3000 Kelvin. And that'll give you a pretty nice yellow color. I want this to be blue though. So I'm going to set this to like 15,000 and it's going to give us a slightly bluish color, but I want it to be even more blue than that. So I'm going to add a hue saturation node before this and set the saturation. We'll just play with this. Make it maybe 1.2, 1.5. How does that look? That's a pretty nice blue color, I think. And again, using the black body just helps us to get kind of the right hue. And then we can push the saturation a bit more to make it a bit, you know, more obvious or whatever. And I think it looks pretty nice. You know, you could obviously go extreme and go up to like 2, but you can see how that's kind of over the top. So let's see how far we can push it. Something like this I think looks kind of nice. And then you can see we're still getting that nice light texture information. We could even come in here if we want to play around with different variations. Maybe we add in a color ramp and flip it. And then this is just like our emission texture color. So we'll just play around with that a bit. See if that looks pretty cool. I think that looks all right. And this isn't going to make a difference, by the way. It is, particularly with like glows or with like anamorphic streaks, that kind of effect. Or if you do any kind of glare effects in compositing, like ghosts and stuff, it's going to come through. And sometimes, in some shots, like before we flip that, you can see just up close, you can actually see the detail in the lights. And I think it just generally, it's something that can look a bit nicer. So let's just go ahead and save our scene. And overall, I'm happy with the way that the ship looks. We'll just give it a second to save because it is kind of a dense model. I'm overall quite happy with the way the ship looks. I'm happy with the way the thrusters look. I'm happy with the way the lighting looks overall. I'm happy with the way the windows look. So there's really only one thing left to do, and that's the stars. Now, the stars, again, are a thing that can be done a million different ways, and really you just got to think about what way is going to work best for your scene. You could import a picture into the background, import images as planes. But what I want to show you is kind of a simple way to do this procedurally. So all we're going to do, we're going to keep this set up here. Although maybe we'll change the strength to like 20. And then we're going to get a noise texture, not a Voronoi texture, a noise texture. And we'll just Control Shift left click on this to preview it. And I want to make the size really, really small, like really small. 2500 is a value that I found works. You see, it's really, like really, really small. And sometimes you can even like bring up the roughness a bit. And like you want it to be really, really small. And then we're going to add in a color ramp here and set it to constant. And we'll just bring this down until we start to see like little hints of stars. You see, 0.76 maybe. How does that look? Yeah, that looks okay. And then we can just plug this in here. Bring up the brightness by like a lot. So they're very small, but they're definitely noticeable. And this looks honestly pretty decent. I think what we'll maybe do is take another noise texture and we'll just bring the scale down a bit, and maybe we will like, we'll like overlay this one on top of the original. You know, just to sort of get like some areas that look more dense and areas that are like less dense. You know, maybe that's a bit much. Oops, not 25. 0.25 maybe. So we just get like little shapes that have like some thicker clusters of stars, and then some areas where it's a bit thinner, you know. We can mess around with the color ramp a little bit. This is just so like, at this point it's kind of just eyeballing it, but like just using noise textures is kind of the tip for the sky. And this at this point looks really good. We could even take this and give it a bit of color. And again, the color that you're gonna want is, that just depends on personal preference. I like to make bluer stars, and you can go as far with the blue as you want. Like in Revenge of the Sith, all of the stars tended to be super blue, like this kind of blue. And I think this looks kind of nice, and it matches up with like the fill lighting that we have on the ship, which helps to unify everything. And overall, blue is just a nice color, especially for Imperial ships. I really like blue. I'll hit T to just hide that. And then we'll come into our scene tab here, or whatever this is. It's output properties, and click render region so that we just crop the view to here, and it'll just give us a better idea of what we're looking at. And we can hit Control S to save our scene here. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in and watching. These are some tips that I've had on my mind and that I've been wanting to show off for a while. I've had some comments on my previous tutorials, on my Earth tutorial especially, asking about like lighting scenes, space scenes and stuff. So I thought I'd take it a bit further and talk about like all sorts of different light materials. I really hope you found this tutorial useful. If you have, definitely make sure to like it. Make sure to subscribe, because I'm hoping to come out with a lot of practical tips and tutorials and tricks and stuff like this in the future as well. This is the kind of thing that I enjoy doing. So check out my Gumroad as well to see if there are any things there that you might want to pick up. I really enjoy doing this, and I enjoy giving out information and tools for people to use. So go and check out my website, and you can see a link in the description to that below. And yeah, it helps to support me and help me to put out more videos like this. So with all of that being said, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that you found this helpful. Make sure to tag me in whatever you make with this. I like seeing the works that people make, and I hope to see you in the next one. See ya.